told people I was speaking to Mandy Moore, the reaction I got was kind of universal. They got very excited, and then they realized it's for the show This Is Us, and then they immediately got emotional and had tears in their eyes. It was very confusing. So I guess my question is that a typical reaction when you're seeing on the street?
Yeah, it's a typical reaction. I think you could ask pretty much anyone across the board in the cast. Like, I think because of the emotional, vulnerable nature of the show, people feel like it's their due diligence to come up to you and talk about their own lives and the parallels they see with the show and the characters and the storylines. It's really cool though. Like, it's never lost on me how special it is to have that kind of connection with an audience. I've never been a part of something quite like that, but yes, it's usually like a tearful approach at the grocery store. I love your show, and then they want to delve into something like very personal about their own lives. It's very sweet.
But I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. There's not many shows out there that elicit this type of response. You
Sure.
guys have caught lightning in a bottle. What do you think it is about this show? And specifically, I'll just put it out there, your character that has resonated with so many people out there that they have just hung on every twist and turn through this saga.
That's so kind. I think it's a real testament to the writing. Like, the writing is just exquisite and so elevated, and that helps us as actors do our jobs. It makes it so much easier. But I do think even with the specificity of the storylines and these characters and what people are going through, people are still able to see themselves in these characters. They're still able to find the little nuances that relate back to their own lives. And I think that just sort of like deep intrinsic connection that people have kind of had with the show from the very beginning is kind of the key to the success and the longevity, and the fact that we could do 106 episodes and keep people with us the entire time. And we could go off and do like an episode that just focused on one character, a character that maybe isn't even, one of the main cast. It's been such a gift. And I think specifically when it comes to Rebecca Pearson, the show, I think, initially focused on Jack, and he is definitely the heroic father figure, and he passes away, and all of that sort of mythologizes him in a way that tends to happen, I think, when we do lose people suddenly and early. But with Rebecca, I think she sort of became the unsung hero of this family, because she really is the glue. She's the matriarch. She is the everyday mom that I think, deserves to sort of be on a pedestal, because she really kept it together for the sake of her family.
I couldn't agree with you more. We're going to get into Rebecca because I got lots of questions I need answers to, but I got to point something out. There's something that just popped in my head.
Sure.
Your show has something in common with like these shows like Game of Thrones in this one aspect. Fans of the show ask very specific questions that are so specific that you couldn't possibly understand. I talked to Maisie Williams about this a couple weeks ago when she was talking about her show Pistol. But I have to imagine, because there's my wife, for example, who refers to This Is Us as the crying show. Okay.
Okay.
And that's Tara's take. And then her friend Melissa, before we scheduled this and we got together, like today, goes, you need to ask her about the train episode, the one that where they went over there. Did that take a long time? And I was like, my God, that is so specific. So my question is, do fans come up to you and ask you such specific questions about this series that you couldn't possibly come up with the right answer, or do you just kind of wing it?
To be quite honest, no, I don't really get approached with very specific questions about the show. I think that like tends to just sort of live in the online world. I think when people approach you in person, it's like they just want to talk about the show more generally. At least in my experience, like I haven't run into some like deep fan who's like, hey, if I ever got the chance to run into you, this is something I wanted to ask you. Like, it's never really come to that. It's more of just sort of like a general broad strokes, overview of what they think of the show. But online, yes, absolutely. I feel like Twitter specifically, it's strange. I've thought about this. Like, I'm not probably going to be a part of a show where you sort of live tweeted in quite the way that we were able to with This Is Us, just because it's broadcast TV and it aired every Tuesday. And it's like you could go online and in real time sort of be a part of the conversation with people. And, now it's streaming, everything's sort of like put out there all at once. And so I don't think it quite elicits that kind of real time conversation. But yes, people had very specific comments and questions and noticed things that I never in a million years would have. I mean, nothing comes top of mind right now, but people pay very, very close attention. I'm very impressed.
Now, when you're first approached with this role, Rebecca, did you envision this as a long-term possibility with this particular character, that it could go on for a couple of years, or was this a short-term thing? Did you see something in this that maybe others didn't see? What was your first reaction when they came to you with Rebecca?
Well, I wish they came to me. I auditioned like everybody else.
You did?
And I did, yeah. And I had sort of been through 4 failed pilot seasons where nothing sort of came to fruition. And I was just not at my wit's end. I was heartbroken. And I was like, I just don't know if I can keep doing this and feel like my soul is getting crushed. And I remember reading the script for This Is Us thinking, oh my goodness, it's so good, but it's NBC and it's pilot season and all of these things that I said I didn't want to like do anymore. And it just was too undeniable to not, put myself out there. And I auditioned, and then it was like 6 weeks before I heard anything back. And they had a group of us come in, a group of women and a group of men, to sort of like do a chemistry read together. And one of those gentlemen was Milo. And I remember the only like bit of information and intel I had before going into this callback was that they loved Milo. Milo was the guy to beat. They were really high on him. And so when they had me just read with Milo, I was like, this is either a really good sign or it's a bad sign that they didn't pair me up with any of these other guys. But it all ended up working out. The thing about it is obviously it worked out in my favor. So I was so desperate for a job. And then the fact that this job came along and I got cast, I thought, even if it doesn't make it, on the air, it's John and Glenn, it's Dan Fogelman, like it's such an incredible group of creatives. Like we will make something we're proud of, undoubtedly. But then, in the pilot specifically, my character, just the way that the story unfolds, I'm pregnant with the triplets, I go to the hospital to give birth. And my story sort of just lives in that heartbreaking world. Obviously, at the end, you sort of get the twist and understand like, oh, these are the parents of this family. But at that point in time, I didn't even understand that the story, if it did move forward, wouldn't be told linearly. I didn't know that episode 2 would pick up 8 years later with the kids at 8, going to school. And then the next episode would jump back in time to us leaving the hospital with the triplets. And then the teenagers would be in the next episode. I didn't quite understand that part of the storytelling device at that point in time. So I had an idea that Rebecca was a bigger part of the story than it was alluded to in the pilot, but not to this degree at all. I mean, it wasn't until probably season 4 that I was like, oh, I think this is a tribute to Dan's mom. I think Rebecca is like, the story sort of, she's the glue. Like it, I don't think, even though I worked more than anybody else just because I lived in all of these different timelines, it didn't really occur to me that the story was, for her until way towards the end.
Now, let's, 2 things. Number 1, do you think that there's a lot of similarities between you and Rebecca? Okay. Mm-hmm. And number 2, as an actor, the challenge of playing so many different ages, I mean, my God, you're playing what, 6, 7 different characters or whatever it is, and they're
Mhm.
at all different times in their life, and you're dealing with, you know, the Alzheimer's curveball, so to speak. I mean,
Mhm.
you don't want to go over that line where you're doing too much and people start criticizing. So how did you prepare? I mean, let's start with the first question. Are you similar to Rebecca?
I think yes, there's definitely similarities, but I also think that's like the trick of good writing as you go further along and telling a long form story like this, the writers sort of write to your strengths or they get to know the actor more. And so I think that sort of just infuses in who the character is. But certainly, yes, I mean, I'd like to think, I mean, the thing I love about Rebecca is she's not perfect. I'm certainly not perfect. She's fallible. She's human. She's made mistakes. She's certainly made choices in her life that I don't necessarily agree with. And I hope that I wouldn't make those same choices. But at the end of the day, like families first. She's always trying to be the best version of herself. She does take accountability. Like she has so many incredible qualities that I hope were similar. I don't know, but she's definitely on like a little bit of a pedestal to me. Like, I have this like I have 6 years of embodying this person who's pretty darn special, and I can always sort of tap into that at some point moving forward. But to speak to your other question about jumping around and all of the different ages and how you prepare, I think I was most nervous in the very beginning when 3 weeks before we started shooting the second episode after the show got picked up, Dan was like, "So I have this idea that I want you to play the present day version of Rebecca, and let's go through all of the hair and makeup and special effects, like rigmarole, and see if we can make it work. And if anybody calls foul and says they don't buy it, then like we'll look into casting an actress to play the present day version. But I really want it to be you if possible." So we did like 6 different hair and makeup tests. It was like, Goldilocks and the Three Bears, like too old, too young, until we sort of found like the right point where everybody felt comfortable. And then I had to go, and my first like scene that they were sort of testing this makeup on was with Ron Cephas Jones. Like I was like, what? You're just like completely throwing me in the deep end. I was terrified. And it all ended up working out. But I think that first season was when I was really sort of getting my bearings, just because we were establishing everything, like jumping around. Obviously, we didn't establish the oldest points like in the future. That wasn't until a couple of seasons down the road. But I really just, I keep going back to the writing, because you could ask anyone on our show, like it really does come down to that. And so much is on the page that it just, not that we don't do our due diligence as actors, especially when it comes to like the Alzheimer's storyline, but it does make our job easier. And with like the Alzheimer's stuff, obviously, yes, this is a reality for millions and millions of families across the country. And it was something that I felt a profound responsibility to make sure that we got right. I knew the writers would do their job, but I also wanted to confer with a neurologist and make sure and ask specific questions, just to make sure that, yes, I wasn't doing anything over the top, and that the writing was sort of living in the real world and nothing was sort of getting glossed over or forgotten about. And yeah, they sort of nailed it. But that was the most daunting aspect, I think, of the entire job, just because I was like, this is, I know this is an underrepresented community of people, of families specifically, that are going through this with a loved one, and I want them to feel seen and represented, and for them to not feel as isolated, to see the storyline and go, oh yeah, that's, they got it. Like that is what I'm living through right now, and hopefully we accomplish that.
Now, did you do but besides conferring with the neurologist, were there uh, any visits you made, any sort of other research you did? Because the thing I notice as, is that through your performance, you do subtle things as you progress towards
Mm,
the inevitable conclusion. And it's not so much just one thing. It might be with your hands, or just how you phrase something. Now, is that stuff you picked up, or is that something in the moment? I mean, I'm just curious.
I think maybe it's a little bit of both. I did a lot of, I mean, as much research as you can, obviously it's really challenging to understand firsthand what's happening, but I did actually befriend someone through an Alzheimer's organization who is in the throes now, 12 years into his diagnosis. And he wrote this, his name's Greg O'Brien. He wrote this incredible book called On Pluto, Inside the Mind of Alzheimer's. And he's a journalist and he's a writer. And so his cognitive reserve really goes towards writing and being able to communicate and express himself. And it by far was sort of like the most impressive and helpful piece of literature, of research that I could do, because it just was the firsthand account of mood swings and what his family is going through and how he feels on a daily basis, and all of these like different analogies that I thought about so often. Like he said, when he wakes up in the morning, like Alzheimer's sometimes feels like waking up, and it's as if like your brain, someone took a filing cabinet in your office that is your brain and scattered all the files across the room, and it's your job to sort of piecemeal everything back together and put it back in its place, and you don't quite know where everything goes. So those sorts of analogies, as general or as broad as it may seem, like I don't know, that I found such specificity in them that I found that all of that stuff to be helpful. I watched a bunch of documentaries. Greg has an incredible podcast that's an NPR podcast that I listen to. So those sorts of things, like anything tangible I could kind of get my hands on, I found to be just great resources.
What was the most emotionally taxing part of this journey with Rebecca? Was it something in the previous seasons, or was it bringing this story to a conclusion in the final season?
I think the hardest part was bringing the story to a conclusion. For me, I thought it would be easier, like specifically the last like few episodes, especially like the train episode, the second to last episode. I thought, oh, when it's, we're in the future and Rebecca is actually transitioning, and I've gone through the almost 5 hours of makeup, and I just get to like lay in bed all day and listen to my incredibly talented friends like say these beautiful words about this character. I was like all secretly excited to just lay there all day and listen to them and soak up that experience. And Susan Kelechi Watson, who plays Beth, she was first, and they filmed her goodbye to Rebecca. Oh, thank God the cameras were on her, because I'm laying in bed and I just have tears rolling down my face as she's saying this like beautiful, heartbreaking monologue and saying goodbye. And I was like, no. Okay, I thought I could listen. I can't. I have to train myself to be out in space somewhere, like not listening whatsoever, because I can't cry. I'm not present. I'm not really here. I'm slowly passing away. It's so oddly, like that was way harder than I ever expected it to be. And even the stuff on the train, I remember, like I've said many a time, I finished reading the script for the first time and I physically got sick. I think it was like just the culmination of like, this is the end. This is the end of Rebecca, of the show, this experience, this thing that totally changed my life. And it was just this strange reaction I had. But then every time I read the script 4 or 5 times after that, I couldn't get through it without like just choking on my emotions. And so I was really worried that it was going to be hard to film in general because I was so overcome. And I was initially, I started filming with Ron Cephas Jones and with Gerald McCraney and doing those scenes with those two guys who I love so much. And also it was like the end was the beginning. Like I started with both of these incredible men, and now I was finishing this journey with them. So it's like once I got a take or two out where I was a little more emotional than I wanted to be, it was like, okay, I got that out of the way. Now I can sort of focus and be a little bit more present. But yeah, it was oddly so much harder than I thought it was going to be.
Well, I love every one of the seasons, obviously. I think the show's great, as I'm sure you've heard many times. But I think this final season was probably your finest hour. as Rebecca, because you really held the emotional baggage for this entire season. Now, were you drained after filming each of these situations? Because I can't imagine you weren't drained after going through each of these moments, especially with that last sequence you just referenced.
Yeah, definitely. And on top of it, I'm pregnant right now. Me that I wasn't really expecting to sort of be taking on in the end here. Yeah, I think it speaks more to just like the end though, because in a way, like every season has been taxing and every season has had its challenges. You know, it's like I don't feel like I worked necessarily any more this season than I maybe more than last season, but in season 5. But before that, it's like just the nature of the way that we tell this story and how much Rebecca kind of lives in all of these timelines. I feel like I did really, I had a lot on my plate, but I think this season in particular, just because it was wrapping up everything and wrapping up her story, and we did live in the future and her, you know, slowly saying goodbye, it did make it like that much more daunting.
Was it like, I can't think of a better word to come up with here. Was it just an emotional explosion every time someone got their final moment in the season? This is the final take with so and so. This is the final take of so and so. Where's the cast a mess?
Oh, a mess. We were all a mess. Absolutely. It was funny because you obviously would know once the schedule came out, like, this is when this person's wrapping, this is when this person's wrapping. And they would like, you would kind of know that someone was done because they would like bring up the camera. They were filming everybody filming everybody's last moments. And then someone would give a speech and talk about like, you know, why the show was so special and thank the crew and all of that. So it's like, as soon as you saw that like extra camera sort of come out of the woodwork, you're like, oh gosh, someone's done. Who's done? And I showed up on my last day of work to my funeral, to Rebecca's funeral, because Chris Sullivan, Toby, and Susan, Beth, like they were all wrapping, and I wanted to see their last moments. And it was strangely more emotional watching them than it was for me to wrap. I think I had like built up this moment in my mind, and I finished. Milo and I wrapped at the same time, which was very fitting because we started it together. And the fact that we got to have our last moments on the show together as well was very special. But yeah, I was more emotional watching my friends wrap than I was for myself. And it was sweet. Sterling and Chrissy and Susan, like once they were finished with work, they came and watched Milo and I wrap. Like we really are a family. And so it was just nice that, you know, in the end, we all could be there to celebrate each other in this crazy ride coming to an end.